Now, before I introduce, say a couple of words about Orgalim and introduce the lineup of speakers, we actually do want to do a first poll. You will see that we will do, throughout the discussions, we will do a range of polls. This will allow for you to interact with us. You can, of course, also submit your own questions. But let's go immediately to the first poll. And I think it's a very interesting one, of course. So, is the industrial strategy of March still relevant given COVID-19? So, Georgiana, do you want to walk us through the voting and how it works?
Yes, the poll question should now be on screen. So you should be able to select one of those options and we will receive the answers. I see most of you are voting. More than 50% have voted. We will leave maybe 30 seconds to allow all of you that want to vote to do it. Great, votes are really coming in. So just a few more seconds and then we will share the results on screen. Okay, I haven't received any more votes, so I am now closing the poll and sharing the results.
Good. So the answer to that is an overwhelming 83% yes, but it needs to be adapted. And of course, that's exactly what we're going to talk about, specifically focusing also on industrial ecosystems. We'll come back to some of these questions, of course. So before I introduce to you the excellent lineup of speakers, maybe a couple of words about Orgalim. So many of you are familiar with Orgalim. But still, I think it's good to just quickly recap. So we are the organization representing Europe's technology industries at the European level. And so in doing so, we are actually covering three main industrial sectors. So we are representing machinery and mechanical engineering, metal technology, and electrical engineering, electronics, and ICT. Now, our industries and the 770,000 companies that it is comprised of manufacture the core components that help also the broader European industry to deliver value to their customers. So this ranges from industrial robots that are used in advanced manufacturing to sensors and technologies used for autonomous and electric mobility. But also, if you look at the equipment for 5G and even to components, of course, required for smarter energy systems. So together, these industries represent 1/3 of European industry, but also important, and especially in discussions on industrial strategy, 1/3 of Europe's exports. 11.5 million direct jobs that are being provided by these industries in highly skilled and future-facing jobs. Now, of course, we have some of the big European players that we should all be proud of also in our membership. If you look at Bosch, Siemens, if you look at ABB, and of course, Schneider Electric, Ericsson, just to name some. But actually, the vast majority of these companies in our industries are mid-caps, SMEs, and micro businesses. So our industries and the technologies that they produce will play a very critical role into a hopefully rapid and sustainable recovery from the current crisis. So that's a quick introduction of Orgalim. Let me now actually come to the debate and introduce some of the panelists. So if I can ask all of the panelists to also switch on their cameras for a moment. There we go. Great. So I will start in the order of the way that the panelists will be speaking. So let me start first of all with Rada Rodriguez. She is the Orgalim president, but in her day job, Rada is also a senior vice president at one of those companies I just mentioned, Schneider Electric, which is a global leader in energy management and automation solutions. Now, what is really interesting, of course, Rada also has a very deep technical background, and at the same time, of course, held various management positions in different parts of Schneider Electric's business. But what's also very important is that she is a true product of Europe, if I can say so, with personal roots spanning east, west, north, and south. So, Rada, we will be looking forward to hearing from you in a moment. Now, the next speakers, and we're very delighted to have two speakers from the German presidency. So Brigitte Isfeld and Carson Schiernbeck. They are both counselors for economic affairs at the permanent representation of the Federal Republic of Germany to the EU. We are very thankful that you're joining us. We know it is a very busy time for you. Brigitte is the current chair of the Council Working Party on Competitiveness and Growth for meetings on industry and internal market. And so she is supported in that role as a vice chair by Carson, who is actually seconded from the European Commission's Director General for Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs, DG GROW, a bit shorter. And so thank you very much for the both of you for joining us. So we look forward to your input. And then we also have, we will then hand it over to a speaker from DG GROW, to Acting Director for Competitiveness and Outreach, Kamil Kiljansky. He has a very interesting background. So he actually was employee number 7 of the, at that time, newly established chief economist team of DG Competition. He also served afterwards as the chief economist at DG GROW. And of course, now he has the acting role in DG GROW. So we look forward to hearing from him. And then last but not least, I wanted to introduce a member of the European Parliament. We have Mrs. Susana Solis Perez. She is from Spain. She represents the Renew Europe group. She is a member of a range of committees, but very important for the discussion today is, of course, she's a member of the ITRE, the Industry Committee. What I think I would like to call out also at this stage is the fact that we're very happy that we are very gender balanced. So we have actually 3 of our 5 speakers are female. So that's great. But what's even better is that 2 out of the 3 have a technical background, because also Susana is an industrial engineer from the University of Oviedo. And she's also a machine engineer. She holds an MBA, a master's degree in marketing management. She has worked for several multinationals. And now is a member of the European Parliament. So a very interesting background, and also a big warm thank you and welcome to you, Mr. Solis Perez. So that's the excellent lineup of speakers. If I can ask the speakers now to just turn off their cameras. Thank you. A small reminder again for everybody who is following, you can submit questions, please do so. We are tracking that. And I will see if there's a couple of questions that we can ask the speakers after they did their opening remarks. Of course, we also have a sufficient time for Q&A later, but we'll keep an eye on those questions. So with that being said, let me now turn over to Rada. So Rada Rodriguez will give us the perspective from Orgalim. Rada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Christoph, so much for this introduction. I want to focus my opening today around the topic of advanced manufacturing, and I will explain in a second why. Because first of all, this we think is the common denominator of the companies we represent. Even if the European technology sector includes different verticals, the digitization of the manufacturing and the digital integration between manufacturing, suppliers, and customers, which is characteristic for the advanced manufacturing, is actually the technological glue. It represents also a competitive advantage for our companies, for the companies we represent, for our industry. And we are absolutely convinced that this will also remain a core driver for European future competitiveness and industrial resilience. It's actually one of the areas where European industry has a clear technology leadership compared, for instance, with the B2C areas. So the reason why I'm picking up advanced manufacturing in my opening today is because we are speaking a lot about industrial systems, and we are dedicating this webinar to industrial ecosystems, and we actually miss today the horizontal aspects, so the advanced manufacturing, which in our opinion should be one of the most important industrial ecosystems for Europe. By design, Industry 4.0 is based on 3 pillars. It's autonomy, it's sustainability, and interoperability. And these pillars will become even more important as it answers the twin challenge which we are facing today, which is, of course, the digital transformation and also the green transformation. We have a massive opportunity here for the European companies to develop and to embrace these technologies in order to capture more value, more markets, European-wide, but also globally. That's why it's important that we do the things right now. So the recovery plan and the future MFF need to be fully focused on these aspects. Now, going to the industrial strategy, which was published by the Commission in March, the 10th of March this year, Orgalim is welcoming and we have also put forward our views at the time in our position paper. Now, of course, the COVID-19 crisis put a lot of challenge also on our industry. Just to give you one example, we believe that we expect that the recovery will go in 2020, will come 2021 and will go beyond 2021. And we think today, based on what our companies are telling us, that up to 500,000 jobs are at risk. So we see it's a very big social impact. Now, this is highlighting also the fact that the industrial strategy and has to be very strong in the focus. And also, as it was seen by the poll which we just had for some minutes on the screen, we see that the majority of the people believe that the strategy needs to be adapted to the new situation. And we see already that there are some new topics triggered by the COVID crisis, which are very much now in the focus of the discussion when it comes to industrial strategy and to the ecosystem. We are discussing more and more about European resilience. We are discussing about strategic autonomy, including the reshoring of the supply chain. We discuss technological sovereignty, even if as we, coming from the industry, we prefer technological leadership. And of course, very important, the role of the industrial ecosystems. When we look at these questions, we believe that the overarching question is or should be how do we secure the industrial competitiveness medium and long term? How do we anchor Europe's industry even stronger within Europe, and how we boost Europe's industrial capabilities to enable us to remain in the forefront of the technological development. We believe that the industrial ecosystem approach is important, but we, as I said in the beginning, we see it is not enough as it is defined today. From our perspective, there are some key points which the industrial ecosystems need to be structured around. And I would say the first one is the goal. What do we want to achieve? What is the role of the industrial ecosystems? Secondly, how do we ensure that we get to that role and to that goal in a more efficient way? And secondly, of course, what questions should be addressed? So coming back to the role and to the goal, the ecosystems needs to contribute to the strengthening of our competitiveness, and it needs to build on what is our strengths. Secondly, it needs to bring us closer to our challenging climate targets and energy targets in 2050. It should represent concrete opportunities for coordination among various companies within different member states, as well as a stronger coordinated action and investment at EU level. And it should, of course, generate economic value beyond the ecosystem itself, which we see as the very important multiplier effect. And I will come back a little bit later to this one. So how to get there? We see here two which are very important. The first one is, of course, the identification of the industrial ecosystems. Now we know that the Commission has defined 14 of them. What we are missing, as I said before, is the recognition of the truly transversal part of the industry, the horizontal dimension, which would secure this multiplier effect. This is the implementation and the development of the advanced manufacturing technologies, the only guarantee for European industrial competitiveness. We believe very strongly that this should be reflected in the Commission. It should be also good for us to understand from the German representatives, now that Germany has taken the presidency, how from the German perspective this is seen, these 14 ecosystems, knowing that the industrial, the advanced manufacturing is one of the biggest strengths of the German industry. The second aspect I want to mention is that we need broader measures. Broader measures needs to be taken. So from our point of view, the stimulus for the industrial ecosystem should include also qualifying for EU regulatory sandboxes, for fast-track access to Horizon Europe funds, based on excellence, based on or a prioritization under other funding instruments, and of course, very important, the next generation EU recovery funding. So let me closing by highlighting again, or picking up, closing the loop to what Christoph said in the beginning. The three topics which would like to discuss with you all today is again governance, how to be successful. To be supported, we need a strong dialogue between the industry and the major stakeholder around the European institution and member states. Governance should include this horizontal approach that connects the individual ecosystem, this 14 vertical ecosystem. And the question which we are raising, what is the status of the industrial forum, which was mentioned as a governance body in the paper in March. The second topic which we'd like to discuss, again, what Christoph was mentioning, is how these ecosystems are linked to the creation of value, so the value creation networks, which now are called the strategic value chains, and how does the European Commission see this interplay between ecosystem and value creation networks. And the third one, you know, we are discussing a lot of the recovery plan. We are discussing state aid at different levels. So how do we ensuring and securing level playing field between the member states and the different sizes and the different sizes of the companies when we start to implement these ecosystems. Now, with these three topics in mind, governance of the ecosystem, so adding the horizontal technological dimension, the link ecosystem to the value creation network, and the level playing field in all dimensions of the single market, I'm looking forward to a fruitful discussion. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Rada, for further kind of setting the scene for the discussion. Before I turn towards our speakers from the German presidency, we have another poll for you. So if we can pull that one up. It's kind of building a bit on what Rada also just said. So do you think that advanced manufacturing plays an important role for Europe's future competitiveness? So
voting is open. We are receiving votes quickly coming in. So again, we will leave around 30 seconds for everyone to vote. Okay. Almost 70% of you voted. So last seconds to still cast your vote. If you have any issues with the vote, please write that via the questions pane. Okay, I will now close the vote.
Well, that's even more resounding than the previous one. So 94% says yes. So I think that's definitely something I would like to build on a little bit later. But let's get back to our panelists. I would like to turn now to Brigitte and Carsten to share the views of the German presidency. We know that for this German presidency, the expectations are high, the challenges are numerous, and the time is relatively limited. I know that in addition to your day jobs, it's probably turning slightly into a night job these days. So we really appreciate you being here, making the time. So the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. You took my first sentence. Hello to good afternoon to everybody, and thanks to Orgalim for the invitation. For us, it's a very good opportunity to present a little bit our priorities. And I think many of the things I will mention now, even if my time is limited, are in line with what Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned. Well, we took over on the 1st of July. And as you can already see from the motto we have, it's Together for Europe's Recovery. It's our aim to work together with all of you. And with all of you, I'm not only talking about together with the member states and the Commission, but also with the stakeholders, with industry. And that's very important for us. And that's also the big priority and the headline of all the things we want to do during our presidency. We are well aware about the responsibility we have. We know that we have to address COVID-19 pandemic and the consequences. And therefore, the key issue during our presidency will be to overcome the economic impact of the crisis and to overcome it hopefully successful by focusing first on the lessons learned. There are some we have to identify, some we already have identified, and also to foster on recovery. So having said this, what we need is we want to reach to restore Europe's full economic potential. And what we also want to do is to restore Europe's unity. Having said this, I would like to switch to the priorities which we, and this means Carsten and me, in our working parties on competitiveness and growth. These are the working parties. The most important working parties are the working parties on internal market and industry. We already had 4 meetings in the council, starting with 2 meetings on the 1st of July. And on the single market, it's our aim or the goal to restore a fully functioning single market. And I think this is also very important for industry to recover from this crisis and to increase competitiveness. For industry, we all are aware that the industry is the engine and should also be the engine for the recovery. And Mrs. Rodriguez already mentioned it, industry is crucial for millions of jobs in the European Union, and that's very important to keep these jobs. And we want to strengthen the European industrial sector. We want to support the implementation of the industrial strategy. So yes, I fully agree with the 94% supporting that the industrial strategy of the European Union from March of this year is still important. But of course, we have to see it in the light of the coronavirus. So, and well, we want to also to accompany or to reach a twin transformation, a very successful twin transformation, a climate-friendly industry, and also a digital and resilient industry. So resilience is very important for us, and we think we should start with concrete actions. We already started to discuss the March package in our working party and industry. On the 1st of July, we had a first overview. Commission presented the most important elements of the strategy, and in the light of the recovery plan, because we are of the opinion that we have to link both issues. There are many valid and very important elements in the March in the industrial strategy, but also in the recovery plan. Having said this, I would like to mention that, well, in general, we agree and we welcome the recovery plan, but we think it should be very important to prioritize the measures mentioned in the recovery plan, because we think we have to first to identify the industries and the sectors which are affected the most, and to see which elements of the recovery plan may be the most efficient for special sectors. And it's also important for predictability reasons and also for investment decisions of industry and of business. Therefore, we think for industry, it's important to have a long-term orientation, and the recovery plan should also already include some orientation points for industry to make the future more predictable. What's also very important from our point in the recovery plan are the national recovery plans, and we think as they are embedded, or should be embedded, because we have to decide on all these things of the recovery plan in the European semester, this could also strengthen the instrument of the European semester. What's important for us is to have a swift return to a fully functional internal market. I mentioned this already, and in this context, I think for industry, a functioning single market is very important, and industry will be and has to be a key enabler for green and digital transformation process. We are planning during our presidency to link the Commission's industrial strategy with the recovery plan, and we really much welcome the trinity or the new trinity of the recovery plan to have a green, a digital, and a resilient industry. Also, in general, we agree with the approach of the 14 ecosystems. What we started in the working party is to get more explanations by the Commission about the analysis they did, how they try to find out the most important areas or sectors of industry, and also to see the linkages between the ecosystems, so the 14 up to now, and to the value chains debate. We see that the ecosystems now, they are much broader than the value chains itself, and they give a much broader and more detailed overview, and they also show the impact in member states, impact also not only in the value chains itself, but in other areas. So it allows to identify the sectors which are the most affected by the crisis, and that is something which is very important, because we have to see where the money will go, and therefore it's very important to identify the areas which need the money at the first place. Commission already provided information on tourism ecosystems, some ideas on construction areas, automotive, but I think we have to I think it's not yet decided if it will be the 14 ecosystems, perhaps more, perhaps less, but this will also be the work in our working party of industry and internal market to go much more into detail with the help and also with the explanations given by the Commission. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned also strategic autonomy. Yes, we are also discussing this issue, but to be very frank, it's a well sensitive issue. I think on the one hand, during the crisis, it became quite clear that there's a need to be at least autonomous in some special areas, but on the other hand, it's also necessary that we have free trade, that we keep our open markets, and it's up to us to find the right balance to have both, because for the next crisis, I think it's very important to be well prepared. And we saw many deficits during this crisis, and we don't want to have the same situation if we have to cover the same situation in some years. Nobody knows, but this was a shock, I think, for all of us. One last sentence, because Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned also the advanced manufacturing. Yes, advanced manufacturing is very important. I think it's an overarching issue which is very important for all ecosystems. I think it's maybe it's not important to have an ecosystem on this issue, but it's important to include it in all the existing ecosystems we have, because it's necessary for all of them. So I think it is not a question to have one. It's more or less a question to have it included in all the industrial discussions we have, and have it included in the framework. So with this, I will give up to Carson. I think I took more time than I was allowed to. Sorry for this.
Yeah, maybe I pass on a few words on the ecosystem approach, because I think there were a lot of questions at the beginning, whether it's a fuzzy concept, what is it? And I think we need to also acknowledge that it has advantages and disadvantages to use ecosystems. On the one side, it has the advantage that we're not talking about narrow sectors. And therefore, I think we have a chance to overcome silos. And I think that is an important advantage, because nowadays the competitiveness is not, you don't need to be any more excellent in just one part of the value chains. You need to cover all parts, which means you need to be competitive in relation to all the other industries. So we rather talk about ecosystems as related industries. And I think capturing these linkages of the strategic value chains and the collaboration, I think it's very important. But of course, for some, it is a difficult, complex topic that is sometimes difficult to grasp and to sell also to the citizens. So we need to find a way to it. But I think the concept as such is powerful in building the linkages to strategic value chains, and are fit for discussing particularly the issue of resilience and competitiveness of the industry in Europe in the future. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much for those introductory remarks. So definitely food for discussion a little bit later. I also see there are a couple of questions already coming in. I am tracking them, and we will get back to that in a moment. So before I hand over to our next speaker, which is of course Kamila Kiljansky from DG Grow, I would like to pull up a slide. When we talk about ecosystems, I think this slide has been circulating a lot. I don't know to what officially it is public, but it is public. So this is basically the 14 ecosystems, at least the latest what we had seen. This is of course a little bit what we want to discuss. So I'll give you a couple more seconds if you haven't had a chance to look at that one yet, to kind of quickly scan it, because it's important that you have a look at this because of the next poll question that we will ask. So if we can pull up the next poll question, very simple question, right? Do you agree with the proposed list of ecosystems?
Yes, time to vote again. And we are seeing people voting, so that's great. Again, if you have questions or issues with the voting, let us know. And we'll give 20 more seconds. Okay, final seconds to cast your vote. Okay, we will now close the vote.
Good, so we have a majority says yes, but more need to be added. So that's 47%. And then in general, yes, around 30%, with 16% disagreeing in general with, I guess, the approach. But okay, good. So I think that's setting the scene a little bit for the Commission. I am handing over to Mr. Kiljansky, Acting Director for Competitiveness Outreach. Unfortunately, he cannot be on the webcam, but he should be on the phone. Mr. Kiljansky?
I think I am on the phone. I apologize about connecting in the old school way. If anything, this sparks the imagination of a 15th ecosystem for webinar software, and always gives the temptation for a bureaucrat to think about harmonization. I profusely apologize for joining in this old school way, and that I couldn't vote. Let me take you briefly through the rationale of ecosystems. I think many things have been said, but I still would like to say a few words, and then I would like to respond to the pointers of Mrs. Rodriguez, Mrs. Isfeld, and Mr. Schiernbeck. So the ecosystems have been introduced in a couple of Commission papers. In the industrial strategy, obviously, this was the first time when it was mentioned, but also in another communication called Europe's Moment: Repair and Prepare for the Next Generation, and also in the staff working document, where also they were used to crudely but still allocate solvency, equity, and investment needs per ecosystem. Now, the way we think about those ecosystems is I mean, this is never meant to be a very kind of a binary and static exercise. I mean, we think of them as networks of value chains rather than value chains. Actually, more than networks, it's more about those value chains interacting. So I think it's a notion which is closer to economic life, but of course, the cost of being closer to economic life is that, you know, it is less statistically rigorous. So we will always have to be relying on statistical nomenclature when doing some calculations, when talking about ecosystems, and that it might lead to some complications, hard choices. So we want to use them as, you know, as much as they're fit for purpose, which is for essentially facilitating the recovery work, because this is the primary reason. Of course, we can talk about other long-term issues, which I'll come back to. But I think the way Commission currently thinks about those ecosystems is purely functionally as a way to make sure we spend taxpayers' money efficiently and in a more productive way in response to the short-term post-corona challenges, but also to long-term challenges that many of you touched upon. Now, those ecosystems have not only private players, not only companies, corporate, they also would have public authorities, institutions, research institutions, so they are very heterogeneous, and they are heterogeneous by design. They also, of course, evolve, so we will be trying to capture as much pulse of those ecosystems as possible, which sometimes is not feasible with classical statistical reporting. I mean, the other advantages we see of those ecosystems is that these are essentially showing interdependence between member states. Value chains too, but I think this is done in a much more compound way. I mean, again, I go back to the practical point. I mean, if you think about value chains, you would have more than 14 certainly, right? And I think then it becomes a bit difficult to focus attention and prioritize if your level of disaggregation is a bit higher. Now, we cannot just talk about, on the other hand, we cannot just talk about goods and services because we know they interact as well, and there are overly crude aggregations. So ecosystems, if you like, could be a bit of a sweet spot in aggregation of economic life and thinking about this in terms of us as policymakers. By all means, they are meant to also be the lens through which we look at regulatory bottlenecks and shortcomings. And I think that, of course, they will also look into the external trade dimension and competitiveness as well. So, you know, I mentioned measurement. So what we did, in the staff working document, we attributed NACE to level codes into those ecosystems, and like this, we were able to come up with a bit more precise needs assessment. But we do not think, and nor do I think would the presidency or the council think them as, you know, basically one-to-one mapping between the needs defined in the staff working document and even as a proportion and the ecosystems, because it was more of a directional assessment to see, you know, how tourism is affected when it comes to turnover drop and in terms of equity issues, as opposed to, say, textiles, and in what countries. I mean, this is a bit of a lens. This was never meant to be, you know, an ersatz, a substitute for you know, political decisions about fundamental country envelopes and how the recovery fund is going to be dispensed. So that takes me a little bit to reactions to what the previous speakers had said. So I think Ms. Rodriguez has a very valid point. That is to say, yes, we have the corona shock, but in what we do in terms of investment, it always has to be a little bit thought through, to at least short term and the long term. In the short run, of course, we have liquidity, solvency issues, and apparently, if you look at some of what the measurement institutions and banks and the macroeconomic constituency tells us, apparently, you know, the real state of the affair is going to be visible after the summer. And the picture doesn't look pretty, and in parentheses also, it might be spilling over into the financial markets, which we have not. I mean, we haven't seen yet the financial markets financial sector actually reacting to potential problems with all the loans and all the financing which had been done. So that is snowballing a little bit. So we will see it a bit later after the summer. So there will inevitably be short-term reaction, and in that sense, of course, Corona had the impact on the tourism ecosystem, on textile ecosystem, on construction ecosystem, health by definition, potentially more than the others. Automotive, for instance, interesting dynamic. I mean, we see that it was hit severely in the short run, but now registrations are picking up, and maybe there's some deferred consumptions in automotive, which is quite interesting. So there's developments you can observe in those ecosystems, but by no means does it mean that do we want to not pay attention to the long-term competitiveness. So we still fall back on the fundamental issues of essentially productivity, stability in the macroeconomic sense, and innovation. I mean, those things will never go away, and that have always been part and parcel of the industrial strategy. But I think we have to see them a little bit in two steps, kind of, in the rescue step and then in the restructuring step. And of course, we all want to go to what Ms. Isfeld called the Trinity, the triple play of resilient, green, and digital. That's indeed the shortcut we all hope to take, to transform the economy in a more rapid fashion at the back of this economic shock. But indeed, this has always been the issue: productivity, stability, innovation. On strategic economy, a few words. I couldn't agree more with what the representative of the presidency said. I mean, it always has to be open strategic autonomy. So the value chains, we have to be very selective in what we decide to reshore. We have to be very selective in what we pinpoint and strategic, because the ecosystems is. I apologize for the noise. The ecosystems are essentially 90% of business economy. So by definition, not everything can be strategic. So we have to really pinpoint where in the value chains we have vulnerabilities. I mean, they could be related to COVID. So we can talk about personal protection equipment or pharmaceuticals, but they could also be related to more strategic issues like technological issues. We all remember the takeover of KUKA in Germany. We have FDI screening now. We have a discussion on foreign subsidies. So that will definitely help us to put a spotlight on where in the value chains we want to have a policy intervention in terms of strategic economy, because that's why we're talking about this, to intervene in some surgical, hopefully, way, because every intervention will inevitably distort the single market. So we will have to be very careful, because needless to say, and I think this constituency knows very well, private firms will also react to assure resilience, because this is bread and butter of every businessman. I mean, it's for a bureaucrat, I wouldn't know firsthand, but certainly diversification, and dual sourcing and things like this have been updated, if you like, and thinking of this must have been updated by the COVID shock. On the other questions in terms of governance of national plans, I mean, I think the jury is still out. That's why we're having intense talks with the presidency, as mentioned by Ms. Isfeld. So the governance of this has to be decided by the political leaders, how exactly this is going to be. But it's going to be a dialogue between the Commission, the presidency, the member states, through which we somehow prioritize how the funds would be dispensed. I mean, ideally, again, through some form of aggregation like the ecosystems, after which, we will try to zoom into projects. I mean, the best way would be, of course, to have almost, pre-programmed projects or pre-programmed analysis, which could be allowing for this dialogue to not be crippled by red tape and to release these funds as soon as possible. So there will be a trade-off between transparency and due process and expediency of the process. I think we have to, the more we pre-program, the more we think in terms of individual ecosystem solution. If you take automotive, we can think about trade-offs when you do scrapping schemes, just as an example. This is the cost of scrapping, this is the way we have to do it, this is the best way to, finance it. I mean, all those things could be a little bit pre-programmed, and then hopefully those national recovery programs, will take off the ground much quicker. The industrial forum, needless to say, will be consulted profoundly on ecosystems. How this will be mapped into state aid, I mean, is yet to be seen. I mean, in principle, of course, all the national reform, resilience and recovery programs are subject to state aid, and hopefully it will be flexible like it has been so far. But in principle, you know, to the extent this might lead to distortions across member states, it has to be assessed through state aid. So I think that's where I would like to stop. So again, I see those ecosystems as a tool. They're not cast in stone. They have to be fit for purpose. Again, informed by a constituency like Orgalim. And in the short run, the primary reason for them, to me, is really to expedite the recovery process. It has to be done quickly and in a targeted fashion. So I hope my connection stayed and you heard me. And I would like to stop and thank you for this.
Thank you, Camelia. Thank you very much. Yes, the connection was okay, although sometimes you were fading in and out, but we could hear it, so no problem. If I could ask you just to go on mute, just to make sure, before we turn now to our last speaker, I wanted to pull up another poll. I think it's an important question, right? As I said, if you look at the constituency of the industries that we represent, the majority are SMEs. So do you believe that industrial ecosystems also benefit them, benefit the SMEs?
Yes, please vote now. I hope you are all seeing the poll on screen and that you can select one answer. We are seeing a lot of responses coming in, so we'll leave 10-15 more seconds. Okay, we will now close the poll. And here are the results.
So 44% yes, but only combined with other policies. 35 yes, and 20% says no, they actually will not benefit SMEs. Good. So something else we can build on later on. So going to the last but not least speaker, so Mrs. Susana Solis Perez. She will, of course, give the perspective from the Parliament. We've heard from industry, from the German presidency, Commission. So definitely time to listen to the Parliament. Now, your role in the ITRE committee, of course, is very important. You're really sitting at the heart of the debate. There is, of course, also very important to know, there is the own initiative report on the industrial strategy. Amendments have been submitted, I think over 700 amendments, which shows, again, the real importance also in the Parliament that is attached to this topic. I would like to call out, for people who haven't looked at the amendments yet, there is an amendment 630, which is also, of course, which is proposed by the Renew Europe group, which you are part of, which focused on governance. And so I think later we can come back about that point. It is a kind of a red thread throughout the discussions about governance, just to highlight that you and your group have also very much focused on that. But if I can turn it over to you, if you could share some of your views on the ecosystems, maybe the link between with the green and digital transformations, and also I think important is the role of collaboration across borders, right? That also came back a couple of times, and I know that's something you're also focused on. So the floor is yours.
So thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank all the previous speakers for their very insightful presentations, and thanks Orgalim for organizing this event, which is very, very interesting at this time. The importance of the industry to achieve a competitive, export-oriented, balanced, and innovative economy is undeniable. And a powerful industry sector not only is key for a stronger economy, but also to generate quality employment. And now we are seeing that thousands of jobs are at stake. And the COVID-19 crisis has shown how interconnected Europe's economy and its value chains are, and how vulnerable we are if we over-depend in third countries. it has also reminded us of the vital importance of having strong and resilient supply chains and the urgent need for Europe to develop industrial capacity to produce in the EU essential materials and critical equipment. I think it is time for Europe to strive for technological leadership and open strategic autonomy. At the same time, we respond to the double transitions of digitalization and decarbonization. And in this situation, with the unprecedented crisis ahead, there is an urgent need to act and accelerate the adoption of the industrial strategy, which, in my opinion, it is more relevant than ever to overcome the economic impact of the crisis. We need to accelerate the transformation and to make sure we allocate enough resources from the recovery package to this strategy. And the strategic industrial ecosystems, this new approach, bringing together all actors from a sector, from large companies to small SMEs, to mid-caps, startups, training centers, associated services, I think there will be key. Many things have been already said about this, but I would like to just to react or to make some comments because why for me I think it is an important way for the transformation. First, I think ecosystems are important for its fundamental role for promoting innovation and digitalization. Industrial ecosystem must be encouraged to take specific measures to strengthen technological cooperation between large companies, SMEs, startups, academia, and research. Second, I think industrial ecosystems can also be a valuable tool for promoting interregional collaboration and drive innovation at regional level. I also think, and related to the poll before, that they will benefit SMEs because they will provide a supportive environment and a level playing field for European SMEs and startups where they can grow, thrive, and be empowered. I agree with the poll that maybe we need to combine this with the SME strategy that needs to be developed, and that we need further policies. And I would like also to emphasize the impact that it could have on regulation. The fact that they can involve a large number of actors can facilitate the dialogue with European policymakers, stakeholders, and help shape and inspire new and better regulation that ensures the promotion of European industry. And you mentioned before, Rada mentioned before, for example, promoting sandbox, which is essential to promote innovation. And I also think industrial ecosystems can generate value beyond the ecosystems themselves. And for example, the reduction of CO2 emissions in energy-intensive industries has or will have positive spillovers for the rest of the society. And finally, ecosystems can play a role in the identification of important projects of common European interest, as they are likely to have a positive impact on competitiveness, sustainability, and value creation across the EU. But we need also to take into account some considerations. First, we have been talking about governance. It is important to note that when defining and selecting those 14 ecosystems, there could be a risk that some value chains are left outside or that they are fit into ecosystems that are not the most relevant ones. For me, advanced manufacturing should be considered because of this horizontal dimension, and we can talk later about the advantages and why advanced manufacturing should be at least considered or evaluated. It is important also to make sure that ecosystems will not cause market distortions or lead to interventionist measures. You were talking that we want to be autonomous in strategic value chains, but we need to make sure that we talk about open strategic autonomies and we don't fall into protectionism. I therefore believe that we need to ensure that the process of defining ecosystems remains dynamic and the interconnections and collaboration between ecosystems are enforced. And finally, explore and establish synergies with other EU programs and instruments, such as, for example, with the mission of Horizon Europe, the partnerships, the EIT, the EIC, and of course, regional and cohesion policies. I think you mentioned before, why not explore the possibility for fast-track access to Horizon Europe funds? That's something that we need to keep in mind. So the purpose for me should not be to create complex and bureaucratic structures, but rather align innovation landscape with simplified procedures and enough support, especially for our SMEs and mid-caps. So thank you. This is my first reactions to this ecosystem. That it is very complex. It is something new for us, and it's for me very valuable to know the position of the Commission, from you, from the industry, in order we use this new approach to develop the correct policies here in the Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments and thoughts. So that concludes basically the introductory remarks. So exactly 1 hour, which still leaves us 1 hour for the Q&A. So I think all speakers did a great job in setting out kind of the setting the scene, the positions and the questions they have. I have a range of questions seen coming in already on various aspects, I must say. So maybe the way I would like to move forward with regards to the structuring a bit of the Q&A. So as I said at the beginning, I think it's good that we focus first again on taking a step back and asking the question, why are we doing this? Why are we talking about industrial ecosystems? And how does it fit in the broader picture? If you talk about strategic value chains, and if you talk about, of course, why actually, how will it be used? What does it mean to be an industrial ecosystem? And I know Mr. Kilianski already kind of outlined a little bit the view of the Commission on that. But I also know that Brigitte, you mentioned the question on the question that you've also asked, as part of the Council towards the Commission about the analysis that has been done. So let's focus for a moment on the bigger question, the why. And then I want to turn later a bit to the question on the governance part, the how. So how did we end up with these 14, right? What is actually the timeline for that? The other question also that came up a couple of times, or the point that came up is, how do you make sure that there is no distortion across the market by focusing on this? I think the link to the competition policy, state aid. So there is a whole range of questions about governance and ensuring that it works well. So focusing on the why. Maybe Brigitte, if I can come back to you and Carson. You've heard now some of the explanation again from Mr. Kilianski. Does that satisfy you enough? Do you feel that your question is answered at Council level?
Not yet, but I think we already started very fruitful discussions. Yes, but I think it was a very good first step. We had the kick-off meeting last week on the 1st of July, and was very helpful to go back to the March package and to identify what I already mentioned, the most important elements. Only for your information, because of Corona, it was not possible to have a really detailed and deep discussion on these issues during the Croatian presidency. Unfortunately not. You may remember that everybody was very keen before presenting the March package. Everybody was waiting for the industrial strategy, but then we were really shocked by coronavirus, and there were so many other things to do that we did not have physical meetings here. It was a little bit of the problem. But then, there were new priorities during the first weeks, and for the Croatian presidency, it was not possible to have these physical meetings and the discussions on this March package, not only on the industrial strategy. I heard from my previous speakers also SME strategy. That's also an important point for the German presidency. And now we do a little bit this work. We are working on this March package, on the different documents presented, and want to bring it together with recovery plan. No, we are not at the stage now that we can say we are ready with the discussion, but we started and we work together. We work together with the member states. We have many questions, and yesterday we asked the Commission many questions. We got some responses, yes, but not all. All questions were answered, but I think there's a lot of work for us to do together. And I would also like to ask you and to encourage you to give your input to us, meaning member states, and to the Commission, and please inform us about what's important for you. What is what you need as industry? What are your priorities? But please also see it as a common responsibility for all of us. I think that's very important. That's also included in the motto we have for our presidency.
If I can add to this, the question of the why, I think the crisis has shown we need more and stronger cooperation in Europe to build the linkages, to bring innovation and solutions that exist already elsewhere in Europe to other regions and other companies. And I think the crisis has shown that we need to look deeper into the value chains and where we're positioned in Europe, and to look, okay, on the one side, where are problems, whether it's raw materials, whether it's technologies where we do not yet have technological sovereignty, and other things, and where perhaps we can tackle some of these issues jointly together. So I think there's a real need for more strategic European cooperation. And one aspect there is to look at partnerships across Europe to link the value chains. And that's one reason why next week we're actually discussing the topic of resilience, ecosystems, together with clusters, for instance. Yesterday already Camille was there in the Council Working Group and presented the ecosystem approach, as mentioned, and we now want to go further to understand better, to also give the various member states hints in terms of what are good initiatives, what one can learn from each other, and how we can better team up together.
Thank you. And by the way, if I can ask all the panelists to switch on their webcam, it's good that we see everybody. But just a follow up to that question. So I hear value chains and I hear ecosystems. Are we now talking about the same thing? I am still not very clear about what the distinction is. Who wants to build on that?
I would like to. Yeah,
okay.
Thanks. I would like to start. Yeah, I think I'm hearing two different, completely two different, let's say, approaches. One approach would be, in my opinion, what came from Mr. Kiliansky, which is the economic level of aggregation of the money. Where do we want to put the recovery money in, exact as you said? Where do we want to put the taxpayers' money? So it's this economic, let's say, view, and the economic, the fact that the Commission wanted to put priority on the sectors which were hit strongest. This is one thing. Now we are coming with a completely different, from a completely different angle, and Susanna was, let's say, around. I understood she was with us in that angle, saying, okay, recovery is one thing, the short-term recovery, but we are talking about competitiveness and resilience of Europe, which means that what are our strengths in Europe now? And industrial manufacturing and advanced manufacturing is one of the, I would say, few very strong points which we have in Europe when it comes to be world leaders and when it comes to be, you know, innovative and competitive and resilient. So do we want to keep that world leadership and we want to extend it and develop it? Then we need to put money in that. If we want to recover the sectors in the society which are the strongest hit today, then it is another topic. So and maybe it's not black and white, but it's something, it's a combination. So if I am understanding right everybody's answer, I see completely two different angles, and we would like to merge them.
Anybody who wants to follow up on that? Mr. Kiliansky, of course, I don't see you, so step in at any moment. Anybody wants to build on that? You know, going back to my question, like we have value chains, we have ecosystems. Are we talking about the same thing? Is it just different perspectives? You heard what Rada said. Any other thoughts on that?
I can try if that's okay with the other speakers. So again, you know, in a classical way, the value chain is essentially, you know, following the value added through intermediary steps of production, distribution, and then finally consumption. So you have, raw materials in one country, you have R&D in another country, you have design and intellectual property, intangibles coming possibly from another country, whether this is the same corporate and then internalized, or whether this is based on spot transactions. That's a different story. But that, value chain usually is limited, is kind of unitary. If you think about this, I mean, this isn't, an economist speak, but you have it in Eurostat in trade and value added. It basically follows a certain categorization. But of course, they interact because they through labor markets, they interact through regulation, they interact through institutional environment. I mean, all those things to some extent are linked. I mean, in a way, the national statistics, when Leontief invented them before the war, is just it's just a question of bean counting. So this is how value chains have been conceived, at least in statistical nomenclature. So the ecosystem is something which is larger, more aggregated. So it kind of looks into value chains which might compete or cooperate, but then it holds all the layers when it comes to regulatory, institutional, and aspects sometimes not captured through usual statistics. So that's, again, my best attempt of explaining it, but I don't think there is a kind of a blue water division between the two, and there shouldn't be. Now, on the question about this distinction between competitiveness or recovery, I mean, I would hope there is no trade-off. I think the timing is indeed different, but it's this is called recovery and resilience plans. At least the ones we'll be talking to with member states. Of course, the European budget is something on top of that, and it has positions which are on a different horizon. But I would think there is no conflict between the two, because if we help, I mean, those industries are interconnected. So yes, we can have an industry which is super competitive, but if we use the recovery funds in a way which is distortive and does something to the labor market, or does something to the input markets, or does something to external trade, or creates any type of cross-border distortions, well, then even those industries which are not directly impacted by the crisis, and there's not that many, by the way, then might also, be crippled in terms of competitiveness. So I do see a certain continuum here, and I don't think it's either or. But needless to say, I mean, we're having all this discussion because of Corona. So of course, in terms of response to citizens, I think we will have to keep a close eye on the short run and the recovery. And as I mentioned, I think we might see a pretty gloomy macroeconomic situation after the summer. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I'm just going to look at some of the questions already. And one of the questions that came in is, just to build on that again, is saying that when you look at the proposed ecosystem, so we had pulled up that slide, you could look at that a lot as verticals, actually. Does that mean, in effect, picking winners in those verticals? And the second part of that question is, where does the Commission actually see the place for horizontal ecosystems, where you could really have that catalyst effect? And of course, advanced manufacturing came up, I think, earlier as an example of a horizontal catalyst. But how, sorry, maybe back to you, Mr. Kiliansky, how do you see this kind of vertical versus horizontal discussion?
I'm not entirely clear what we mean by vertical or horizontal. I think a value chain is vertical because it goes from inputs into outputs and through intermediate stages. But if you talk about an ecosystem, to me, I'm not sure. And at the risk of playing, an armchair, Ludwig Wittgenstein. I mean, in terms of dialectic, I'm not sure what this is vertical or horizontal. I mean, that I think is that it's like a cloud of economic agents to some extent. So I'm not sure. You can think, that maybe if you talk about, textiles as opposed to, retail, then one would be a little bit more homogeneous than the other. So it's more homogeneous or heterogeneous. But vertical, horizontal, I'm not sure this is the ideal categorization, but not to kick the ball to Carson, but Carson did work on this much longer than I did, so maybe he has some reactions on that one. On picking winners, again, in my mind, precisely because we have them so broad in a way, the ecosystems, and we have SMEs and we have the incumbents, all the shapes and sizes, the public and the private. I think that actually decreases the chance of favoritism and any capture by the policymaker, because we're not talking about, you know, a narrow industry, which might risk some form of favoritism and picking winners. Thank you.
Thank you, Carson. The ball went to you. I don't know if you want to comment on that. Maybe that was a bit also your past at DG Grow, but you want to say something about that? How you look at that, probably in your current capacity?
Yeah, maybe explaining the ecosystems, the picking winners and the horizontal. I mean, maybe let's start with the horizontal. I think Brigitte explained very well that, like advanced manufacturing, we have basically competences that cut across all. And I think what is in the industrial strategy, we have the green and digital transition. And for me, this is a horizontal aspect that needs to go across all ecosystems. So that's the first. And what do we mean by ecosystems value chain? I mean, maybe we need to break it down a bit concrete. I mean, at the end, one may talk about the Karlsruhe IT cluster or whatever. You talk about regional strongholds in particular areas. And then these don't work anymore these days in isolation on their own. They have parts of the value chain that work together with others in Europe. I mean, think about the automotive industry. If there's one part that is not delivering, the others, you can't produce a car anymore because you need the supplies. So we are connected in Europe. We have a connected economy. So basically the value chains connect different strongholds of an industrial ecosystem across Europe. And finally, about picking winners, that sort of goes back to the whole old industrial discussions. Also from cluster policy, where I worked on, we heard a lot. We can't pick winners. Okay, I fully agree. We shouldn't choose which one we should finance, but we should help winners to emerge. And that means we need to bring the actors together that can find solution, where we can match supply and demand. And I think this is where we have a task in Europe. And this is what we may have to facilitate under the German presidency, that we need more strategic collaboration, for instance, in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mrs. Solís Perez? I don't know if you're on mute, maybe?
Sorry. No, yes, I wanted to mention that for us, when we were presenting these hundreds and hundreds of amendments in the industrial strategy, it was important for us to emphasize the governance, the governance of these ecosystems, because for us it is crucial to integrate in the governance all the stakeholders, all relevant stakeholders from the industry. This is key for the future, because those ecosystems will have an active role in the definition of future measures in the next regulation. And this is important that all stakeholders, like the industry, like the sectoral plans that we had into account in the past, are having into account. So it is key for us, and this is something that it was one of our amendments. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So let me then transition for a moment to the governance part as you bring that up, right? So again, we have those 14 ecosystems. How did they come about, right? What is the process? And what are the next steps? So is this it? These are the 14 ecosystems? Because if I go back to the industrial strategy of March, if I'm not mistaken, of course, there was also, and this was also one of the questions from Philippe Adriances from the ERT, like, to what extent will this industrial forum play a role in that? Because the way it read was, we'll have the forum and then we'll talk about things like ecosystems and the strategic value chains. And now it seems a bit the other way around. So the question that also came in is like, when can we expect this forum to appear, and what will the role be of that forum with regards to the ecosystem discussion? I don't know if there's somebody who wants to take that. I think naturally I'm going back to Mr. Kiliansky, of course, with regards to the Commission's view on that, and then I'll ask the same question to the other people, what they think should happen. Mr. Kiliansky, can you hear me?
Yes, I do. Is it okay now? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Did you
Apologies.
get the question?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
So on what next? I think what we're trying to do is to, while we kind of vetting a little bit the concept and making sure it is fit for purpose, and again keeping one eye on the recovery, how this can play a role in the recovery governance, we're starting to zoom in on specific ecosystems, which will be presented in various constellations. So we started doing some work on a few of those, and we're hoping to dig a little bit deeper into specific issues which could be useful for the national resilience and reform work. So basically the next step is to zoom in into individual ecosystems to see what type of projects we could have in the pipeline, what type of financing is optimal, what type of indicators we have, what type of KPIs for measuring performance. So basically it's just going a little bit deeper while still discussing the concept and again discussing a bit in the Commission what role it could play in the governance, because I mean this is like we're talking to you and broadcasting it while we still converging on the process. Exactly, this is all happening in parallel, as we know. On the Role Industrial Forum, on the exact date, I would need to check with. This is a different directorate. Mark Niklas was yesterday in the council, my good colleague. I will check with him. I can come back to you, but on the exact time. But I'm as I mentioned before, I mean, Industrial Forum will definitely be a forum where ecosystems are discussed. I mean, that goes without saying. But as for the concrete date, I'm afraid I don't have this information at my fingertips.
Okay, and so just to be clear, then these 14, it's maybe not the final list. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, they're in sense of final, like I mentioned, they are meant to be dynamic by definition. But relatively speaking, I think it's more opportune now to focus on those individual ecosystems in terms of the individual modalities and how they can help in recovery. Relatively, that's a more interesting and productive and constructive discussion than trying to agonize over whether this is 17 or 12. So, at my personal, and this is something which is my as everything I say, my private conjecture about this. But I would say, we should not overthink the categorization, because it will always be to some extent arbitrary, and I would prefer to actually zoom into individual ecosystems and modalities and how they can help member states in terms of recovery, of course in partnership with the industry.
Clear. Anybody else who wants to follow up on the governance part? Brigitte?
Thanks a lot. Only to mention this, we are also very interested in the Industrial Forum. There's no surprise, I think, because we very much appreciated the work of the Strategic Forum, and I think the group will be established in autumn. I expect October. We have no clear date, but we have a very close discussion on this with Mark Niklas. And I'm sure that also the Working Party will ask how the mandate of this new group will be, and also ask about the issues this group will tackle. I think it's a very good opportunity for industry to give input in this group, and all of us benefited from the work of the Strategic Forum. And one additional remark to the ecosystems. For us, it's also very interesting to get to know how these ecosystems are linked. So on the one hand, there might be very individual ecosystems. It's something I think Commission and also member states have to identify and analyze. And maybe that's not possible to have one tailor-made structure of an ecosystem, but there might be also some linkages between them. It's very important to see how they are connected. That is also something the Working Party will work on together with the Commission, and where we are asking the Commission how these connections can be identified and can be helpful for the further work.
Thank you. Did Mark say anything about the timeline that you can share? Was it still September?
Well,
okay.
it's up to Commission.
Yes, throwing the ball back to the Commission. Good. But before we do that, Rada, Susanna, do you want to say anything more about the governance or questions that you also have still? Susanna?
Yeah. No, I just wanted to say before that the governance is key for us. We think the governance will be key for the work. We think this is still a dynamic process. Defining these ecosystems, we need to discuss here in the European Parliament the future policies coming from the industrial strategy, and yes, many things have been discussed here now in the Parliament, and I would like to keep an open discussions with the stakeholders, with the Commission, with the new presidency, and I think this is important because it will be key for our future. What is for the recovery, and also it will depend on the recovery plan that will be approved in September. But we'll need to make sure that whatever the ecosystems are, we allocate enough resources, and the industry is a key pillar of the recovery all around Europe and also in all member states, to make sure that we coordinate the same type of policies. I just wanted, I'm sorry, because today is the plenary session in the Parliament, and I would need to vote in 5 minutes or something like that. But I would like to thank you for inviting me here. I hope we can discuss further about this. Yeah, for us, it's an open discussion, and this is strategic, the role of the industry and this open innovation strategy in the future for Europe.
Thank you very much. Good luck with the voting.
Thank you, Susanna. I would like to pick up a little bit also on this governance and to link back to the question what we meant with vertical and horizontal, because I think that was a question not yet answered from my side. So because if we just think about some of the what we call verticals, like automotive industry, like energy intensive, like renewables, like textile, these all, if we want to have an automotive production in Europe, it needs to be digitized, it needs to be done with advanced manufacturing. Who is the provider of the technology of advanced manufacturing is the horizontal layer of the manufacturing industry. So this is what we mean with horizontal and vertical. The horizontal is something which is enabling all the other verticals to exist and to be successful. So not being part of the discussion, so being an enabler of technology and creating the technology for textile, for renewables, for automotive, for mobile, for smart mobility, etc., and not being part of the discussion, because the risk we see today on governance is that we will have vertical governance on each ecosystem. And this is the big risk we see. So that's why we are bringing this discussion up. Okay, yeah, we are not an ecosystem. What means transversal or horizontal means that we are enabling all the others to exist and to be competitive in the future. And we would like to be part of the discussion when it comes to industrial strategy.
Thank you, Rada. So going back to a bit, okay, what does it mean now? What does it mean to be an industrial ecosystem, right? And I think funding has come up a couple of times. So we have the recovery plan, the recovery funding, and so I think also Mr. Kajansky also mentioned that the way that we should look at ecosystems, and correct me if I'm wrong, is also a way to spend the taxpayers' money more efficiently. So I think there is a clear link between the discussion on ecosystems and the funding part. It should not be the only one, right? But it is an important part. So how does that connection actually work? Meaning, as I understand, the plans would be, for example, proposed by member states in the context of the recovery funding. Discussion, would it be approved by the European Commission? Is at council level? But so the way, should we look at ecosystems as somebody, be it at the Commission or council or member state level, will be looking at for this funding, we're actually going to see if it really matches or we can use the ecosystem structure. And if it does, it actually has a leg up. It can actually has a advantage compared to other projects. So my question is basically, how do you see ecosystems play a role in the whole funding discussions? So whoever wants to take that one first.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I can apply. Again, I would never see it in such a rigorous way and mapping between, if you're in an ecosystem gets an envelope of X, then you will get a fraction of this X. I would be very surprised if this, again, this is all still evolving. So I think we're really expressing our opinions, and this is a dialogue with the presidency, and the commission is still debating this governance. So I think we slightly, this is still early days. I would be very surprised. I mean, remember, the national plans will be national. So a country will will propose a recovery and resilience plan, and it will be based on for a country. It will have projects in it, and of course, the whole hope is that through those ecosystems, the Commission could somehow direct the member states into channeling those projects to the ecosystems which provide the biggest value in terms of productivity and competitiveness, and which suffered most. I don't think that member states will not be. I'll be surprised if the templates to submit those plans would essentially have 14 columns, and those columns will essentially have to have companies attributed those columns. This is a bit of a guiding feature. This is a hope to capture the interdependencies, to suggest to member states places in economy where there's biggest value added. But I would never see them in such a direct way as you mentioned. I'll be very surprised if this goes in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Carson or Brigitte?
Yes, I think the big challenge is how to bring together the national level and the European level, and to bring also all these European instruments together with national needs. I think that's something we have to work on. It's very important to bring this together, the needs of the member states, and then see on European level where the needs of member states are. And I think that at this stage there's still a gap between national level and the European level.
And if I can add to it, I mean, we have maybe the experience of smart specialization strategies that were envisaged to guide innovation-related investment under the structure funds. And every region was asked as a conditionality before funding would flow to have a strategy in place. And then sort of different services in the Commission then tried to see, okay, every region has now identified priorities on clusters or ecosystems, whatever. And would it not make sense to bring those together to see what can be done jointly and where we can team up? And that was sort of in an ad hoc manner. And I think this time it's much more important that we're really a bit structured and coordinated and push the cooperation across ecosystem much further. And I hope, and that's why I fully agree that the governance is a key issue. And I think that is something that we certainly in our council working groups will try to discuss and bring further, because we need to have the actors together and also ensure that SMEs are represented, for instance. And that means we need to reach out to SME intermediaries, cluster organization or others, so that we cover the whole economy and not just the big ones.
Rada, any thoughts from your side?
No, I think I tried to make my point. So again, as we see the technology industry, the European technology industry, first in terms of mass, in terms of volume, extremely big. I mean, 1/3 of the European export. It's our companies. It's driving the innovation. The third aspect is driving the value creation, because we were outperforming the other industrial sectors before the crisis, and we are also seen to recover faster compared to the other sectors of the economy. And enabling the other sectors to be competitive, we think that we should definitely be one of the stakeholders at the table when we discuss the industrial strategy. So for me, again, the things are at different time levels. So yes, put the money, the taxpayer money where it makes most sense, which means that on one side, the sectors which were very much hit, but also the sectors which can secure that we will make our transformation in form of digital and in form of green. So that is a very important one. And the second one is, okay, maintain what we have as competitive strengths worldwide, which is the manufacturing industry and the advanced manufacturing in Europe, and develop that further. So I think these two aspects need to be put together, and today I see them in a separate discussion. So I see today these ecosystems more creating silos than reconciling the silos. So I think probably something is missing here, probably in the communication. I don't know, but definitively it should not link, it should not lead to silos. It should reconcile the short-term view of the recovery with the medium long-term view of resilience and competitiveness.
I'm going to one of the questions, just building up, because I think you mentioned also international cooperation. One of the questions from Jay Christie is directed to the German presidency. So saying the presidency aims to improve Europe's international cooperation. How will these 14 ecosystems be further worked on in an international cooperation? So I think, how do you see that fit within a broader global discussion? First, the German presidency, if you want to give your thoughts on that, and then maybe to the Commission and to Rada.
Thank you very much for this question, but to be very frank, I think that's a little bit too early to discuss this now, because what we are now doing is we started to identify the ecosystems to get more explanation or about we started with tourism, for example. Now we're going on construction areas and automotive sector. We want to get in the group of the member states more knowledge about each of these ecosystems Commission presented or Commissioner Breton presented. And there's a lot of work to do. And I think it will be one of the next steps to think about to think in an international dimension. So first, I think it's now up to us to do this good coordination Mrs. Rodriguez asked for, and to see how all this is linked together, and to show that it's not a contradiction at all, but that it's linked together, and that also the value chains are integrated part of these ecosystems. And I think in another step, when we have identified the most important ecosystems, and I'm not sure if during our presidency we will be able to go into detail of each of these 14 ecosystems, because these are very complex issues, you know about this. And in the next step, of course, it's also important to discuss the international dimension. But sorry for this, that's at this stage not feasible for us. So, but in a later phase, I think we will do this.
But if I can follow up on that, maybe the question, if you extend it to global supply chain discussions, right? So a lot of our industries and a lot of the ones that are also, of course, in these ecosystems, they are part of a global ecosystem. So the question that then comes up is, as you are, or as the Commission is evaluating the ecosystems at the European level, I guess it's being taken into account how these sit also within a global ecosystem. And also then the next step is where there might be vulnerabilities, right? I think that's also what Mr. Kiljanski said earlier about looking at the vulnerabilities. I don't know if that was the exact word, but so there is, of course, that international link. And I don't know if that question was going in that direction, but that's kind of my follow-up point to that. So I don't know if anybody wants to kind of, how much can you distinguish what we're doing in Europe on ecosystems from a global discussion?
I think there are already some instruments, and my neighbor sitting in the social distance can already mention and explain one of them, the rapid alert function instrument, for example. Maybe Carson, if it's allowed, can explain a little bit.
Well, the exit strategy also highlighted that we need to look into where the disruptions in the value chains and the supply chains. And of course, we are not anymore just can talk about an ecosystem on their own, because we only talk about the parts of the ecosystems that are in Europe, but parts are elsewhere. So therefore, indeed, we need to have a global value chain perspective, but we need to look then into, okay, where are, for instance, and learn the lessons from the COVID crisis, where were the vulnerabilities, where were the problems, and how we can address them. So it's a bit looking at, where are the weaknesses, and can we maybe find alternative solutions in Europe within the global value chains, and where we don't have the chances. Do we need to build up capacities? Because we can't do this in everything, because then we can't do strategic autonomy in every of the ecosystems, because then we all will be poorer. So it's still, we need to have an open economy, but we need to think about some things. Maybe we have capabilities in Europe to find solutions to raw material shortages. Maybe they're innovative or technological solutions in some sectors, and we can bring them in. So I think, and it's a work I think that is important to capture now. There were actually discussions. I think the European Cluster Alliance have met Monday to Sunday every morning in the crisis, discussing issues. And we need to bring this much more to the wider audience and have these structured discussions, because this is where then the collaboration started. And if you bring this in an organized manner, this cooperation, then you can really build connections, match the solutions that exist in one region by one company and bring this to others. And I think we need to facilitate this more, because an SME on his own cannot find the partners where they are. This needs to be helped with. And that's, I think, an important work that needs to be done. And I think the crisis has shown how important this is.
And this is especially important for SMEs, for example.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yep. So maybe Rada, you're working for a big company, right? But your company works also with a lot of SMEs. How are you looking at that global, the global angle too?
I think that this global local angle, in my opinion, is not directly linked to the ecosystem. So the global local angle is a supply chain angle, and supply chains is for every sector of the economy. So it's not not only linked to this 14 or whatever number that ecosystems might be. So today we are experiencing a global supply chain which was created over the last decades, and in some areas it's extremely complex. I think that what the COVID crisis revealed was the fact that we can't have very concentrated, highly concentrated supply chain on few locations, and we can't just continue with this just-in-time delivery concept. So the decentralization, the diversification of the supply chain is something which every single company, small or big, is looking at. And this is done linked to the specific strategy of the company, again, big or small, is how near it wants to be to its customer. And I think that every successful company wants to be near to the customers. Now, if this, we all agree on that, we can say that it is Asia for Asia, it is maybe America for America, and we would like to have maybe more Europe for Europe. And in order to achieve that more Europe for Europe, there are certain bricks which needs to be in place. And this means that you need to have the raw material, but you need to have the components, but you need to have energy prices which are competitive, you need to have resources, you need to have competencies. And when all these bricks are in place, every single company would prefer to produce near to their market. So as long as we have those bricks and we have put them in place and we have a European demand, we will have also more European production. So for me, these are two, I would say, different topics. So and I think it would be dangerous and it would be complexifying unnecessarily if we would like to link now everything around this ecosystem. So now we discuss ecosystems for recovery, priority for recovery. We discuss ecosystem also, we link them to global supply chains. We will get a very, very complex situation. And that would not be, let's say, my favorite scenario.
Good. So maybe, Mr. Kiliansky, I don't know if you want to react to some of the previous statements. We're nearing the end of the conversation, so I still want to provide some time to talk about the kind of level playing field, market distortion fears, competition law. So we'll keep the fun topics for the last. But Mr. Kiliansky, anything you would like to add to that?
Yes, maybe just on the external dimension front. So again, there is there is the FDI screening, which is an element which is important in terms of making sure that if a company is taking over in one country, it doesn't produce any negative externality on another country. There's the white paper on foreign subsidies, which Department for Competition is in charge, and also in terms of vulnerabilities. I mean, the analytical work probably will go in a direction into looking into individual value chains, industries, ecosystems. Again, here the traditional issue is not so important, and looking into, for instance, how many foreign suppliers we have for whatever component we discuss. So I think this is the resilience work which will be very important into plugging all this, because remember, this is the part of the Trinity. So resilience is part of this. So the external dimension will be subject to further analytical work, because of course it's important to have feedback that something is resilient, be it politically or because industry tells us in a convincing way that this is something which is subject to a resilience consideration. But it's also good to do some mapping of those value chains to the extent, especially international ones. So if you think about for instance, one of the ecosystems is space and defense, and we do know the vulnerabilities in terms of relying on certain technologies when it comes to both defense and space. So in some industries, it's going to be pretty critical to map it into, which countries you depend upon, which industries you depend upon, whether they are publicly owned or privately owned. Is this an issue? I mean, so that analytical work is yet ahead of us, but I think it's also important. Maybe again, not necessarily for the recovery step, but definitely for the longer step in terms of competitiveness and productivity. So I think that will be my comment to what I've heard in the recent round.
Perfect, thank you. I would like to call out, so two questions, I'll try to combine them a bit. It's kind of this, so the first question was from Joel Johnson. He's Director EU Single Market and Trade Policy at one of our members, Association of Swedish Engineering Industries. And so he says that, we are gravely concerned that this sectoral approach may lead to a distortion of competition on the single market and ultimately undermine Europe's comparative advantage for global competitiveness. Now, there is another part of that question, but I would like to stick to that and then also add to that one, the question we got from Gerrit Steinfurt from IBM, where he basically asked the question, what the opinion is of the German Permap and the Commission on the role of IPCEIs, so these important projects of common European interest, in the context of the national recovery plans, and how will governance be impacted. So I just want to bundle that, like what's the risk of market distortion? And what's the role that you see for these IPCEIs moving forward? So maybe if I can ask first Brigitte and Carson to share some of their thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to start with IPCEIs. IPCEIs are, that's not new for, also under the German presidency, very important, but before the presidency for Germany, IPCEIs were already very important. We are part of two IPCEIs already. We work on batteries. And also for the Working Party, we will have a discussion next week, concrete on IPCEIs, because we think it's very important to have this the process and the structure of the IPCEIs as transparent as possible. And therefore, we will talk, because as IPSA these are important projects for Europe. So it's important for all of the member states, and we would like to discuss about the process in the IPSAs on batteries, microelectronics, and to see how they work, to see first results of the batteries at this stage, and that will be a very detailed discussion in our working party. Therefore, we see this also as an important instrument to strengthen the competitiveness on European level. It's one of the important instruments to be very clear on this. It's not the only one, but it's one important instrument to recover and also to strengthen industry. So would you like to add something on IPSAs now at this stage?
No, I mean, but next week we have it tabled, so we will discuss. We have 4 practical examples from the member state, because I think what is very important, what we heard from different member states, that they were saying, okay, some are involved, but how can you? So I think it will be our priority to make more information available, to make it transparent how you can team up in this, and to share the lesson learned in those that are already ongoing, and to highlight those where their further interest to team up is. So that's what we're tabling basically now in the discussion.
And if I may add one further point, yesterday we had a very long meeting of the Working Party on Industry with input from the industry. That's important for our discussions. We don't want to discuss only between member states and commission, but it's very important for us to get input from industry. We had yesterday, for example, 3 external speakers, and for the next week it will also be the same. We have industry there, unfortunately, because of well, restrictions, only via video conference, but nevertheless we have presentations and discussions, getting to know lessons learned by industry and what's going on. For example, and yesterday it was on hydrogen, for example, and we will proceed with IPSAs. And it's really important for us to get to know what's going on in reality in your life, and to bring this together with So therefore, but I think we already answered one of your questions. Sorry.
So the other question is, and it's an easy one, yes or no, maybe even, which is, do you think there would be there's a risk of market distortion?
Please, sorry, please, could you please repeat it?
So the question was, and then it can be relatively quick answer. Do you think that actually the industrial ecosystems approach might have a risk of market distortion? Difficult yes or no one, probably. It depends on what will come underneath it, I guess. But
I think it depends on how we work on the ecosystem. It depends on what was mentioned several times now. I think the key word is coordination. So, and to have a very efficient and very close coordination, and to have a very good governance. And I think that was also what was mentioned by Mrs. Rodriguez, so that we need this. And
Camille gave a good answer yesterday on that question, so maybe he can repeat that.
Camille, can you repeat yourself, and then we'll wrap it up.
That presumes I remember what I said 24 hours ago.
You have to check the report.
I'm just a commissioned civil servant. You know, if I could remember, I would be in the industry. No, I think the short answer to this is, well, if we do our job properly, like Ms. Isfeld said, if we do our job properly, it shouldn't. I mean, there are 2 types of distortion of competition broadly. Like we're talking about those related to state aid and those related to antitrust, because we're not talking mergers here, right? So, you know, every time when you bring industries together, you know, you have some risk of collusion. You know, you can be ironic and say, well, industrial forum could be a forum for collusion, but of course we are not that hysterical, precisely because there is so many different players that the mechanism for coordinating pricing and quantity setting in a competition sense is impossible in a forum like this. So I think the antitrust problem is eliminated because of how broad brush those ecosystems are. When it comes to state aid, I mean, they will be vetted through state aid control. So, you know, all the national plans will go through the state aid washing machine. Maybe is not the right expression, but they will hopefully be, you know, looked through in a expedient way, like so far. So this will be subject to that type of analysis, and I do not have any doubt that my colleagues in DG Competition will do a proper job. Finally, on IPCEI, I think this is actually there's those two characteristics of IPCEI, at least, which I see interesting in the context of ecosystems, because they do have conditionalities, right? One conditionality is they have to have this cooperation feature between member states, and this is exactly where the connections between ecosystems come in, and best practices between member states as against the backdrop of ecosystems. And the second one, in terms of conditionalities, at least the primary ones for IPCEI to take off, is exposure to global competition. So this is where we bring the exposure to international scenes. So I think in that sense, all the elements we've been talking to today will be very useful in terms of defining the IPCEIs. But will ecosystems be en bloc mapped into IPCEIs? I doubt it. This is not the purpose, and this is not the level of aggregation. IPCEIs, we're talking batteries, we're talking microelectronics. I think this is a little bit different vantage point than we're talking when it comes to ecosystems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have to wrap it up here. I would like to thank all the panelists. I do have a very important slide still. So before you drop off, we'll show that one. Basically, we want to call out a couple of things of future industrial strategy events also. So Industrial Strategy and Focus Roundtable on the October 15th, which will be on the circular economy. So if you want to keep posted on that, also please register for our newsletter. But I also want to call out on December 2nd, it's just announced that we will have another one on industrial AI and the link to liability and a lot of other legal discussions. So I think definitely two very important and also a bit more detailed discussions on industrial strategy. We are working on our next generation EU position paper. That's the working title. We're copying a little bit the Commission, so apologies for that. But that will come out in September, where we actually will go into a bit more detail even on ecosystems and some of the topics we discussed today. So keep a close eye onto that. You will get a survey at the end of this webinar. Please provide your feedback. One of the things maybe is Friday afternoons. It's maybe not the best time of the week, but I would like to thank all of you who stayed on. So thank you very much. Share your impressions via social media. You see the handle and the hashtag here. And we have recorded, as you know, the webinar. We will post it on our website, so you can kind of replay it if you want to. So with that, thank you again to all of our speakers, to the German PermApp. So Carson, Brigitte, thank you very much, given your very busy schedule. Rada Rodriguez, I would like also to thank, of course, Kamil Kiliansky for dialing in, and the MEP, Susana Solis-Perez. Thank you all very much. Have a great weekend, and hopefully see you in our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye. Bye.